Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
Thanksgiving at Barbara's house was never a casual, cozy affair, no matter how hard she tried to make it look that way on her Pinterest perfect table. The napkins were folded into swans that somehow looked judgmental. The silverware was polished so bright it could blind you if the chandelier hit it just right, and the air always carried this brittle tension, like if you laughed too loud or put your elbows on the table, the whole place might crack down the middle. She called it Carter family tradition. I called it a hostage situation with pie. Tom and I had been married for 11 years, and this was my 10th Thanksgiving at her house. I missed one because I was in labor with Maddie, and Barbara still referred to it as that year Jenna skipped. She was the kind of woman who kept score like it was her religion and wore condescension like a damn fur coat. Not loud, not rude exactly, but slicing all the same, like someone buttering toast with a scalpel. She hated that I wasn't from their world. My parents ran a mechanic shop in Dayton, and I put myself through law school by bartending on weekends and working at a diner at 5 in the morning. Tom met me at a courthouse during jury duty. I had accidentally parked in his reserve spot and gave him hell for trying to have my car towed. He said he knew right then I was the one. Barbara? She never thought I was the one for anything except ruining the Carter legacy. So here we were. Thanksgiving dinner. 13 of us crammed around the dining room table that could seat 16, but somehow still felt too tight with her in the room. The turkey was dry, the wine was flowing, and Barbara's passive aggressiveness was aging like fine vinegar. From the moment we walked in, I felt it, her eyes scanning me head to toe like a TSA agent looking for smuggled class. She hugged Tom with both arms, kissed his cheek, and gave me the air peck of politeness like I was the neighbor's cat. She was dressed in ivory silk and pearls that probably had a better retirement fund than we did, and her tone all night had that southern sweet poison to it, compliments that felt like insults, smiles that were sharp enough to bleed. "You didn't bring your casserole this year, Jenna?" she asked as she passed the asparagus with the kind of grace only inherited wealth can teach. "I suppose it's hard to keep up traditions when you didn't grow up with them." Everyone chuckled awkwardly, like they were watching a sitcom they didn't want to admit was real. Tom squeezed my knee under the table. It was his version of saying, "Let it go," which had become his favorite phrase since year 2 of marriage. I smiled. I always smiled. That was the game. Be the bigger person. Be the ice queen with a law degree and a spotless kitchen. But then dessert came. And something shifted in the room. Maybe it was the wine, Barbara's third glass. Maybe it was Maddie laughing at a joke from her cousin and spilling whipped cream on the embroidered tablecloth Barbara had imported from France. Or maybe it was just time. I don't know. But Barbara stood up, held her wine glass in the air, and said the words that would detonate the night. She cleared her throat like she was giving a toast. Everyone turned. Forks paused midair. "I just want to say," she began, smiling like a woman about to light a fuse and pretend she wasn't holding the match, "how thankful I am for family. True family. The kind that shares blood and heritage and values." I felt the temperature drop. You could hear a damn fork clink on porcelain across the room. "And I think," she went on, looking straight at me now, voice all sugar and cyanide, "we all know some people marry into a family, but they never really become family. No matter how hard they try." Her eyes didn't blink. Her voice didn't waver. She said it like a prayer. Like a curse. Like it wasn't meant to be mean, just true. Cold, clean truth. "You'll never be family," she said louder now, so even the cousins at the kids' table heard. "You were just convenient." Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Tom's mouth opened like he was about to say something, but no sound came out. My daughter looked at me like she didn't understand what just happened, but somehow knew it mattered. A lot. "And me?" I smiled. Not fake. Not forced. A real one. Because finally, she had dropped the mask. After 11 years of snide remarks and cutting glances and being told I wasn't like them, she'd said it. Out loud. In front of everyone. I didn't have to prove anything anymore. The villain had monologued, and the room had heard. I stood up, collected the plates, walked them into the kitchen. I helped clear the table in silence while everyone pretended to keep eating, their forks now stirring cold green beans instead of mouths chewing. I said nothing, not to Barbara, not to Tom, not to anyone. But inside me, something clicked. Something old snapped, and something new started to grow in the space it left behind. Later that night, we drove home in silence. Maddie had headphones in. Tom stared at the road like it owed him an apology. And I stared out the window at the moonlit trees passing like shadows in the dark. When we got home, I showered, brushed my teeth, and crawled into bed next to Tom, who hadn't said one word since dinner. He was still in his dress shirt, staring at the ceiling. That's when I knew. I knew I wasn't going to take it anymore. I wasn't going to be the good girl who smiled through it. I wasn't going to let my daughter grow up thinking silence was strength and swallowing your dignity was the cost of family. That night, I laid in bed next to Tom and decided to burn the whole damn house down. Quietly. The thing with people like Barbara is, they don't scream in your face or throw plates across the room, not unless they're drunk or cornered, and even then, they'll apologize with a smile that feels like a slap. No, Barbara fought her wars the way women like her have been doing for generations, slowly, quietly, under chandeliers and behind tight-lipped grins, using dinner parties as battlegrounds and sweet tea as a weapon. And I played the role, willingly at first. The lucky daughter-in-law who had married up, the one who didn't need to be accepted as long as I was tolerated. But there's only so much polite humiliation a person can take before they stop being polite. It didn't start at Thanksgiving. That night was just the last straw, not the first. The first was probably the night Tom introduced me to her at a restaurant in Charleston. She shook my hand like she was checking for calluses, and when I told her I was studying law, she smiled wide and said, "How ambitious," in a tone that made it sound more like a disease than a compliment. After dinner, she leaned into Tom's ear while I was in the restroom and said, "She's got good posture. Not great teeth, but she'll do." He told me that 2 years later, during a fight. We weren't fighting about Barbara. We were fighting about money, the house, our daughter, but somehow that line came out, and once it did, it never left me. It echoed through every birthday party, every holiday, every forced hug and tight-lipped smile, every time she gave Maddie a gift labeled from Grandma Barbara and Grandpa Carter, even though her husband had died 10 years before I met Tom. She acted like he was still alive because, in her mind, the family line ended with him. Everything after that, including me, was contamination. Barbara loved to perform. She'd host these holiday events that felt less like family gatherings and more like a goddamn exhibit at a colonial museum. Lace table runners, silver polished so hard it practically screamed under the light, and food that was more for show than eating. Every year, she'd hand me a place card and say, "You can help set the kids' table. Dear, you're so good with little things." Not little kids. Little things. Like I was the family babysitter, not the wife of her only son and mother of her only grandchild. The worst part, though, wasn't what she did to me, it was how she tried to claim Maddie. My daughter, my blood, my everything. Barbara always found ways to undermine me. If I told Maddie she couldn't have a phone until 8th grade, Barbara would hand her one just for emergencies in 6th. When I told her not to give Maddie sweets before dinner, she'd slip her cookies behind my back and say, "Don't tell Mommy, this is just our little secret." And when I confronted her, she'd smile, that same infuriating smile, and say, "You're overreacting. Darling, she's just a child." But Maddie wasn't blind. She was smart, observant, too much like me for Barbara's comfort. Still, I started to see signs that the poison was working. Maddie repeating things Barbara said, like, "Mommy's not really a Carter," or "Daddy said Grandma's house is the real family house." And that word "real" was what lit the match. So I started digging. I didn't do it out of rage. I didn't even do it out of revenge. I did it the way you double-check a locked door after hearing something outside. I wanted to see how deep the rot went. Because if Barbara wanted to define me by what I didn't own, I figured it was time to look at what she thought she did. The house, the one we spent every Thanksgiving and Christmas in, the white-columned colonial with ivy crawling up the bricks and the iron fence out front like it was guarding royalty, was supposedly hers. Always had been, according to her. She called it the Carter estate, as if it were something passed down from noble blood. But when I pulled the deed records, something anyone with a computer and a few brain cells could do, I noticed a few anomalies. For one, the house was purchased in 1975, over 55 years ago. But something didn't add up. Not the loan amounts, not the names on the documents. Barbara's name was there, sure, but so was her late husband's, and after his death, a refinancing document from around 2010 that caught my eye. That year rang a bell because it was also when Tom's credit mysteriously took a nosedive, and we had to delay plans to buy our own house for over a year. Turns out, Barbara had refinanced the property using Tom as a silent guarantor. His signature was on it, sloppy, distracted, probably signed under the pretense of just some tax paperwork. Which meant if the house ever defaulted, Tom, not Barbara, would be liable. She'd legally tied her son to her estate like an anchor, and if she ever started to sink, she was dragging him with her. And me? I was tied to Tom. But not to the house. Not to the deed. Not to anything real, as Barbara would put it. There was also a subtle clause tucked into a second document, a contingency related to property taxes. If taxes went unpaid for more than 2 consecutive years, the property could be reevaluated and possibly subject to foreclosure proceedings, depending on the current market value and lien priorities. It wasn't automatic, but it was real. And the taxes? They weren't being paid by Barbara. They were coming from an account linked to Tom's name. That was when I sat back in my chair, closed the folder of documents I'd printed, and just let the silence fill the room. I'd gone looking for answers. What I found was a loaded weapon sitting right there in her fancy little handbag of lies. There it was. A loophole the size of Texas, and Barbara had no idea she was standing over a trapdoor. There's a specific kind of quiet that settles into you when you realize your enemy isn't just cruel, they're calculating, clever, and willing to gamble with other people's lives as if they were playing some high society board game with your future as the losing bet. After I uncovered the details about the house, the deed, and the taxes, I knew I couldn't let it rest. Not this time. Not with Maddie growing up and soaking in every glance, every insult, every time I stayed quiet in the name of family peace. There are moments in life when you stop being a daughter-in-law, or a wife, or even a mother, and start being something sharper, something colder, not out of hate, but out of protection. Because if I didn't act, this would keep festering. And I refused to be another one of Barbara's mistakes that kept apologizing for existing. I scheduled the meeting with the real estate attorney under a different name, just to consult, just questions, and brought the documents I'd printed and highlighted in obsessive color. The office was small, tucked behind a strip mall, and the man who greeted me was in his 50s, gruff, but sharp-eyed. He didn't waste time with pleasantries after I laid the paperwork in front of him and said, "Tell me if this is what I think it is." He leaned in, adjusting his glasses, flipping pages, eyes darting from signature to signature like a bloodhound tracking the scent of a scandal. It didn't take long before he sat back and said, "Well, if this were my mother-in-law, I'd be furious." Turns out, 15 years ago, Barbara refinanced the house under the pretense of consolidating debt after her husband passed. But she didn't qualify on her own, not for the amount she wanted, anyway, so she got Tom to co-sign. Legally, it held him responsible. Financially, it chained him to that house in ways he never even realized. From the way the documents were worded, it was clear she downplayed the risks. Hell, she probably shoved them in front of him during Sunday brunch and said it was just routine paperwork for the house, and he, trusting, stupid, or just too tired to argue, signed it without reading the fine print. And here's the real gut punch. She hadn't made a mortgage payment from her personal funds in over a decade. Tom's accounts, including one joint one we used for savings, had quietly covered tax obligations and emergency levies, while she sat in that damn white-columned house sipping Pinot and judging me like she owned the world. But now? Her credit was cracked like a busted windshield, barely holding together under the weight of deferred loans and credit card balances she kept hidden. According to public records, she had taken out 2 personal lines of credit in the last 5 years alone, both marked with late fees and minimum payments. Barbara was sinking, slowly, silently, and she tied her son to her leg like an anchor. The attorney explained that if Tom stopped paying property taxes for 2 consecutive years, especially under this specific clause baked into her refinance agreement, the property could legally enter the first stage of lien collection and, eventually, bank reclamation. No sheriff knocking on doors tomorrow, no foreclosure auctions next week, but a fuse would be lit. And in 2 years? That fuse could reach the dynamite. I didn't tell Tom everything when I got home that night. Not yet. You don't drop a bomb without checking the wind. Instead, I started small. I cooked his favorite dinner, rosemary chicken with mashed sweet potatoes, and poured him a glass of the whiskey he hides behind the cereal boxes. Over dinner, I asked, softly, sweetly, "Do you ever think we should just walk away? Like, all of it. The house, the drama, start over." He looked at me like I'd suggested we move to Mars. "What are you talking about?" he asked, half laughing. "That's the family house." "No," I said, "it's your mother's house. And it's never felt like ours." He didn't argue. He just took another sip, staring at the table like he was afraid of agreeing too quickly. But the moment I really knew I had to go through with this was when Maddie came into my room the next morning, clutching her phone, quiet, like she was afraid of waking something that had already been broken. "Grandma told me," she said, voice tiny, like a splinter under the skin, "that you're not really my mom because you didn't grow up in this family. She said you're temporary." I felt something in me die. Not the usual ache Barbara could provoke with her nonsense. No, this was different. This was rage buried so deep and so old it felt like I was digging up bones. I knelt in front of Maddie, grabbed her hands, and looked her dead in the eyes. "I am your mother," I said, slowly, clearly. "And no one, not even her, gets to tell you otherwise." She nodded, but her lip trembled, and it broke me. Because Barbara wasn't just attacking me anymore. She was reaching her poison hands into my daughter's mind, trying to warp it into the same twisted logic she fed the rest of this damn family. And that was the last goddamn straw. I went back to my notes that night, reviewed every line, made copies, called the attorney again and asked him what steps I could legally take if someone wanted to stop supporting a property they were co-liable for. The answers came quicker this time. He'd sensed the shift in my tone. This wasn't curiosity anymore. This was planning. I wasn't trying to destroy her. I wasn't looking for revenge in the fire and brimstone sense. But if she wanted war, then I was going to win it with a smile on my face. There's a moment in every carefully built lie where the structure starts to groan, just the tiniest creak at first, like a floorboard nobody noticed was weak, and you can either ignore it and hope the whole house holds, or you can pull that board up yourself and see what's rotting underneath. After the day Maddie looked me in the eye and repeated those words her grandmother had shoved into her mind like a poison seed, I stopped waiting for Tom to see the truth on his own. I stopped playing the role of the understanding wife. I stopped pretending Barbara's war was quiet and harmless and just part of the deal. Because it wasn't. It was spreading. And it had to stop. So I made a plan. Not one born out of panic or rage, but cold, deliberate strategy. If Barbara's house was the stage she performed on, then I would take away the lights, the curtain, and finally, her audience. I didn't need to yell or scream or show my hand. I just needed to start removing the pieces she thought would never move. It started over dinner one night, just me and Tom, sitting at our kitchen table that had a burn mark from a candle Maddie knocked over 3 years ago and a missing screw that we never got around to fixing. I made his favorite pasta with too much cheese and not enough vegetables and poured him a glass of wine before I said it, casually, like I wasn't flipping our entire world upside down. "You ever think we might be better off with some space from your mom?" I asked, twirling my fork like it was just small talk, like I hadn't already bookmarked 3 rental listings across town and saved moving company quotes in my phone. Tom looked up, a little tired, a little confused, and said, "You mean like not visiting as much?" I smiled, sweet as syrup. "I mean like a fresh start. New place. Just us. A rental. Something temporary, just until we figure out what we really want." He looked hesitant, but not resistant. Barbara had been blowing up his phone for weeks now, pushing him about money, about appearances, about why we weren't bringing Maddie over more often. He'd started to see through some of it, not all, but enough for the fog to lift a little. I didn't need him to understand everything. I just needed him to nod. And eventually he did. Within 2 weeks, we had signed a lease on a 3-bedroom rental about 7 miles from Barbara's house. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. It had chipped paint on the back deck and a strange squeaky tile in the hallway, but the air inside felt cleaner somehow, like nobody had ever poisoned it with fake compliments and pointed silverware. We told Barbara it was temporary, some nonsense about needing our own space, while Maddie focused on school, and Tom played his part perfectly, parroting my lines without even realizing they were lines. And then came phase 2. One morning over breakfast, while Tom scrolled through his phone and Maddie crunched on cereal beside him, I said, "Hey, if anything ever happened to you, God forbid, I'd be kind of screwed, huh?" He looked up, chewing. "What do you mean?" he asked. "I mean, legally. Finances, the house stuff. I'm not on anything. If something went wrong, I wouldn't even be able to talk to the bank." He nodded, brow furrowed, thinking about it for the first time. I kept going. "I was reading this article. Apparently a lot of couples do this now. Power of attorney. Just in case something happens. It doesn't mean anything changes unless something goes wrong. But I'd feel better. You know, being protected." Tom was the kind of man who hated paperwork but hated conflict more. He signed the documents 2 days later without blinking. It was filed, notarized, and tucked away in my desk drawer before Barbara even realized anything had shifted. Then I pulled the final string. I logged into the account that covered Barbara's property taxes and monthly obligations, technically one of Tom's old accounts, which she still had access to. I rerouted the funds to a savings account under my control and changed the passwords. All legally within my rights, all within the boundaries of that little document Tom had signed without hesitation. The next payment bounced, then the second, then the third, and then she called. The phone rang on a Thursday morning while I was sipping coffee, watching the sunrise paint the rental kitchen in light that didn't feel like hers. I let it ring twice before I picked up. "Jenna," she hissed, no greeting, no preamble. "Do you know what's going on with the account?" "My mortgage company called. They said there's been a lapse. I'm getting letters." I took a slow sip. "I'm sorry," I said, as calmly as a librarian asking you to keep your voice down. "I'm just not family, remember?" There was a silence so sharp I could almost hear the blood draining from her face. "You little," she started, but I hung up before she could finish. Let her shout at the dial tone. Within a week, the bank sent formal notices. Within another 2, I filed an official notice of change with the property records, documenting Tom's withdrawal from financial liability based on new evidence of misrepresentation during the refinance. And as a cherry on top, I submitted an anonymous complaint to the Homeowners Association about multiple code violations, peeling paint, overgrown hedges, a busted gutter visible from the street. Barbara responded the way only Barbara could, publicly, dramatically, viciously. She cornered Tom in a parking lot outside his work, shouting at him about betrayal, about that woman turning him against his own blood. Neighbors heard. Coworkers watched. And for the first time, Tom didn't defend her. He stood there, shell-shocked, finally seeing what I'd seen for years, that his mother wasn't a matriarch, she was a parasite in pearls. Maddie asked what was going on, and I told her just enough. Sometimes, people who say they love you only do when you play by their rules, I said. But we don't have to play anymore. And then, one cool Saturday morning, a man in a beige windbreaker walked up Barbara's brick steps and slid a thick white envelope through the mail slot. She was home. She saw him. She opened the door too late to stop him. She read the first line, and the scream that followed made birds scatter from the trees. When the papers hit her doorstep, I was standing across the street, drinking coffee. Tom didn't say a word the night Barbara got the eviction notice, but I saw it in his face as we lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, pretending the silence between us was sleep and not the chasm that had been growing for years without either of us daring to name it. He knew, even then. Not the details, not the strategy, not the hours I spent with lawyers or the nights I stayed up highlighting legal codes by the dim kitchen light, but he knew something had shifted, something permanent, something that couldn't be smoothed over with a nice dinner or buried under the weight of tradition and guilt. The quiet between us wasn't comfortable anymore. It was a reckoning waiting to happen. It came 3 days later on a Sunday that tried its best to look like any other, with birds chirping and lawn mowers humming in the distance and Maddie upstairs watching some show about baking competitions where people cried over burnt sponge cakes. Tom walked into the living room holding 2 mugs of coffee, his olive branch, always, and set one down in front of me without a word. Then he sat across from me, elbows on his knees, hands clasped like he was praying, and said, "Tell me everything. Please." I didn't pretend I didn't know what he meant. I didn't feign confusion or play dumb or act like it was some misunderstanding that had snowballed out of control. I simply nodded, took a sip of the coffee, and opened the drawer in the side table where I'd kept everything: photocopies, recordings, emails, legal notices, a damn timeline of events so precise it looked like a criminal case file. I laid it out on the table between us like a puzzle already solved. "I started this to protect Maddie," I said, watching his face more than my own hands. But somewhere along the way, I realized I was protecting myself too. From your mother. From you. From the version of you who still believed she was just misunderstood. He didn't interrupt. He didn't argue. He flipped through the documents slowly, carefully, stopping when he saw his own signature on the refinance forms, that lazy scrawl he always used when he was in a hurry and not paying attention. He blinked at it like it was the first time he realized the ink had chained him to something that wasn't love, it was leverage. "I didn't know she did this," he said softly, more to himself than to me. "I didn't know I signed all of this." "She didn't want you to know," I said. "That's the point. She knew how to play you, Tom. She played all of us." Then I played him the recordings, clipped audio files from conversations Barbara had with Maddie, with neighbors, even one where she was on the phone with someone I didn't recognize, laughing about how I wasn't really one of them, and would never be more than a ring on Tom's finger. I didn't record those moments because I planned this from the start. I recorded them because part of me hoped I was wrong. And when I wasn't, I knew I had to hold on to the truth, because she never would. Tom sat back like the wind had been knocked out of him, one hand over his mouth, eyes blinking too fast. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he asked, and for a second I almost laughed, not out of humor, but out of the bitter irony that it always came down to this one question that every woman who's ever been gaslit into silence has heard at least once in her life. "Because you wouldn't have believed me," I said, and my voice didn't shake. "You were still her son back then. Now, you're Maddie's father first." He looked up at me, and something in his face changed. Not guilt, not anger. Something else, maybe grief, maybe recognition. And he didn't argue. He just nodded. Barbara moved out the following week. There were no goodbyes, no dramatic speeches, no cousins crying or family friends stopping by with casseroles. A moving truck pulled up to the house she used to rule like a southern queen, and for the first time in 20 years, no one came to help her pack. The neighbors watched from behind curtains, whispering theories, but no one came close. She loaded her boxes with a crew of strangers, barking orders with a voice that didn't carry the same weight anymore. Even her pearls looked dull that day, like they knew they were losing their throne. I stood in the doorway of our new house, one hand wrapped around a mug of tea gone cold, and just watched. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I didn't wave. I just watched her walk down the steps with the last of her boxes, spine stiff, jaw clenched, dignity packed into cardboard with the rest of her history. She didn't look back. Maddie asked once, "Is Grandma going to live somewhere else now?" And I told her yes, simply, without adding venom or sugar. Just the truth. And when she asked why, I said, because sometimes adults make choices that mean they can't stay close to people they hurt. Even family. She nodded, the way kids do when they don't fully understand but trust you enough to accept it anyway. Tom didn't talk much for a few days after the move. He made dinner, folded laundry, helped Maddie with homework, but his silence was a new kind, one that wasn't retreat, but reflection. I think he was mourning the version of his mother he'd invented. And I let him. We all grieve in our own ways, even if what we're grieving was a lie. That night, after Barbara left for good, I lay in bed with the window open, listening to the wind rustle through the trees, and thought about everything I'd done, not with regret, but with clarity. I hadn't set out to destroy her. I'd set out to protect what mattered. I hadn't come to be accepted. I came to survive. She was right, you know. I'll never be family. But I didn't come to be family. I came to protect mine. And now that she's gone, I don't know what scares me more. That I won or that I liked it.